The following presentation is part of the Beyond the Blast Doors network.
Brandon, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for the invite.
Awesome. So people probably know you as the host of Talking Bait 94, but maybe give us a little bit about who you are and tell us about the podcast.
Sure. Well, I'm Brandon. I grew up during all the prequels and the special editions especially, and so it's been really a big part of my fandom, watching the documentaries and reading the behind-the-scenes books. And so Talking Bait 94 is kind of an extension of that, where really all I do is just one-on-one interviews with the people that made Star Wars. So the cast, crew, and creators, whether they're authors or people that put together the source books or editors, and kind of put it all together into maybe an oral history of Star Wars at some point. So that's the hope.
That's great. And is it specifically the films, or you have also had video games and TV shows as well? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's everything that's ever been an official Star Wars thing is the requirement to make it onto the show. So
that's excellent. Yeah, I also have to say I think it's one of the most cleverly named podcasts.
Thank you.
When I started my podcast, mine is named after one of the news sections that I used to run at Star Wars Galaxy magazine. So not terribly creative, but Talking Bait 94, that's right up there with I think my favorite, and I've never even listened to the show. I hate to say that after I'm going to say the name of the show, but I think my favorite name for a show is Grand Muff Talkin'. I think
that one's great. Yeah,
that's such a great name.
Yeah.
But yeah, so talk to me. And so when did you start it, and give me a little bit of what got you going into building this really cool podcast?
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting journey for me, making my fandom more part of my life. And it was really prompted, I think it was Last Jedi fever. So it was right before Last Jedi came out, and I was just kind of trolling around on iTunes. I was like, are there any Star Wars podcasts out there? And I stumbled upon Blast Points, who have been doing it forever.
Yep.
And over that Christmas break, I pretty much listened to like 50 Blast Points episodes, I think, just like within a month. And I texted my producer now, and I was like, hey, we should do a Star Wars podcast. And it kind of escalated from there. So that was in December. We got a logo in January. And then I recorded episodes until May. And then I think we tried to time it close to the Solo premiere. And we just have been going from there. I think that timeline works out, but we've been just going from there.
So how have you had, I must admit, I feel like the Joker in the Michael Keaton Batman when you get those guests, and my first thought is, how does he get these wonderful guests? So do you have a movie background, or how do you make, you don't need to tell the secrets of how you make connections because they're great guests, but do you have, is that part of your everyday life, or how's that connected?
Yeah, so, initially started, I was really lucky growing up. I grew up in Plano, Texas, and that really doesn't mean anything to anyone, but that's where, for a long time, Official Pix was headquartered. And Official Pix, for a long time, was the officially licensed Star Wars autographs and photographs. And so they would also have a huge convention twice a year, literally 5 miles from my house. And so growing up, knowing who these actors were, whether they were the smallest, bounty hunter or stormtrooper, all the way up to Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill and everyone coming through, I was really able to not only foster a love of like those behind the scenes people, but also a couple early on connections with at least knowing who their managers were, knowing who was actually like behind the scenes people. And so then I've gotten lucky, obviously, having a few people early on say yes, just with blind emails, really.
Sure.
And then over the years, it's been really nice where guests have recommended their friends or their people that they've known through their conventions to come on the show. And it's just kind of grown from there. But yeah, I was working in film up until very recently. I was the VP of marketing for Fangoria, the horror magazine.
Yeah.
And that was helpful as well. I got a couple. Paul Dini was one of my guests because of that. But really, it's been just kind of a connection slowly but surely throughout, everyone that's ever worked on a Star Wars movie. So.
Yeah. So is it your Fangoria experience that made you feel like I could do a podcast, or do you have experience with that kind of thing? Or is it just like many of the 12,461 Star Wars podcasts out there. Did you just say, hey, much like myself, I was like, hey, I did fan interviews for print back in the 90s when print mattered. I could do this. What made you sort of decide this is the way I'm going to do this process?
Yeah, I mean, I've been lucky where my career is digital marketing, and that's just what I do. I do social and I do digital, and now really Talking Bay turned into a career for me, where we were doing Talking Bay for probably a year as an extension of a website that I had built with Jason, my producer, that was covering pop culture in Dallas. And then that website got the attention of Fangoria, and then Fangoria kind of acquired the two of us to come on board. And then that's, I helped build the podcast network for Fangoria, and we had like 20 shows before it all blew up. But so it's been kind of an interesting turning around of turning my hobby into a career. And even what I'm doing right now is helping build podcasts for agencies here in Dallas. So yeah, it's been kind of just a whirlwind switch for me, at least.
That's great. So you worked at Fangoria. You've obviously been a Star Wars fan. You grew up, you said, with the prequels. Tell me about some of your earliest memories of Star Wars and the role it played in your life growing up. Yeah,
definitely. I was in big trouble very early on with Star Wars, if only because the special editions came out in 1997, and I'll just date myself. I was 5 years old, and so my dad took me to see Star Wars. And so seeing the three on the big screen is here, like that. Like we saw once a month was a new Star Wars movie, which was incredible.
Right.
And then at the same time, of course, Power of the Force 2 was coming out, and so the toys were everywhere, and it just felt like Star Wars was a huge deal. And that really then extended, of course, to the prequels and me growing. Not only being able to like learn how to read, but I told someone earlier, I learned how to use the internet because of Star Wars, like to download the Phantom Menace trailer, right? Like I had to learn how to use the internet. And then that kind of grew and grew and grew, and some incredible communities online, like Rebel Scum, the forums there, Hyperspace, being a member there, convincing my parents to let me do all these things as like a 12-year-old to figure out what was going to happen in Revenge of the Sith. So, so it really has been kind of a journey for me where I've grown with Star Wars. And it's been just kind of a nice thing that's always been with me. So
yeah, so you grew up at the time that I was doing the Star Wars Galaxy stuff, and it wasn't really and in fact that's how I got into digital marketing as well. I had one of, you probably visited the site. I had one of the first ones, was called Echo Base, and it was way back in the day. And but you're right, it's you can say probably that the Star Wars prequels taught a lot of people, or encouraged a lot of people, to get into this whole internet thing that was going on. Because I remember downloading the trailer, taking like overnight downloads and stuff like that to watch it. So you got to see the originals, the special edition versions of the originals in the theaters before the prequel. So how you were prime age for the prequels. How did you respond to the prequels as a kid?
Oh, I loved them. I love the prequels, and I still, obviously love them so much. And I think that's what we're seeing now, obviously, with whether it was the anniversary panel at Celebration, but I think now people my age are 30 years old and have purchasing power and love the prequels. Yep. And I think it's so formative for so many of us. And like for me, Jar Jar was never an issue. It was Jar Jar Binks was my October 1999 Halloween costume. You know what I mean? And it really was not only an important movie for me, but I think the things that surrounded it, and we can make fun of it now, like how over merchandised it was, but really it was, no matter what restaurant I went to when I was 7 years old, or what grocery store, or whatever, it was a Star Wars thing. And I think that's something the sequels had a little bit, but I think the prequels really just did the Star Wars merchandising even more so than the original trilogy.
It's funny you say that. We've been talking about that, being some of the folks on my network. In fact, with interview last week with Tori Fox, we talked a little bit about that. That was the pinnacle of Star Wars merchandising, and I think maybe even Phantom Menace more so than any of the other films. At least that's the ones that I remember. I remember going to Toys R Us when all the action figures hit, and just and going through there. So did you become a collector then? Are you still a collector? Or are you?
Obviously, as a kid, what you're collecting are the things that you can get, right? You get anything that you can touch that says Star Wars on it. I thought was going to be worth So like I was reading those insider columns, or Steve Sansweet was being like, well, like here's like what this would be worth, or like you could check eBay. So all these things, I was like, oh, like we cannot take this out of the box. Like so I was like the worst 10-year-old of all time. Where I was telling my little brother, it was like Christmas. I was like, do not open this. Like this Obi-Wan Kenobi Target exclusive will be worth so much. And I sent him. Actually, I found it. It's from Revenge of the Sith, and it's an Obi-Wan reflective lava whatever Target exclusive, and it's worth like $12 now. And I was like, hey, like it's still in box, it's mint condition. You're welcome. But so yeah, as a kid, it was the action figures, it was Happy Meal toys, it was pieces of paper. My parents just texted me, they're like, hey, can we finally throw these away? And it was like the Attack of the Clones cereal boxes, you know, like anything I could find was collected, and that's continued now. I've gotten a little bit better and a little more refined is a general term. My fiance would not think that it is me being picky, but mostly now it revolves around the books. I collect some Black Series, and then anything McQuarrie I kind of just collect, or anything concept and behind the scenes. So yeah, it's fine. It's not a problem.
It's not a problem. I'm fine. Yeah, it's funny. I have you were talking about the Power of the Force stuff, and that was really kind of that resurgence. You had the He-Man Luke and all that stuff,
right?
And like you, I have a bin in the basement of unopened Power of the Force action figures that I would say probably about 10 years ago. I was going to try to sell them, and I couldn't give them away, which I didn't. I kept them, but yeah, it was funny because, you know, it's sort of like, in a way, it's sort of like baseball cards, in that like everybody realized that if you had that baseball card, you're never going to let that go again. I'm never going to be that guy who let that card go, and so the collecting becomes kind of a challenge. So you're in the Black Series here, yeah. So it's interesting from a collector standpoint too, because there is so much; it's almost impossible to keep up with. When I was working with Steve, and when you were talking about what we were doing in Insider and Star Wars Galaxy, like, yeah, there was a finite amount of Star Wars things. Right now, it's everywhere. You go to the drugstore, it's there. You go to the supermarket, you're going to find Star Wars something. So it's just about everywhere. So what's your favorite piece in your collection?
That is tough. I was not prepared for this. I'm looking around. This is a small. That's very small. Because one of the things I didn't bring it up. So the thing that I've been really focusing on recently is expanding my cast and crew merchandise. And then, or like Industrial Light and Magic, Skywalker Ranch, that kind of thing, or autographs. And again, like we were talking earlier with official picks, I'm like very picky. I'm like, if I could have gotten this when I was 12 years old, that's what I will buy. I won't buy anything else. So I have a couple things that I really love, especially autograph wise, which are a little more, you know, like I have an Irvin Kershner autograph. I have a Lee Brackett autograph that I really like, in one of her books. And so things like that. I have a couple of McQuarrie signed things that mean a lot to me that I've been able to just pick up over the years. And really now I'm in a position as almost 30 where I can be a little more spendy. And I think the things that I got when I wasn't as, you know, financially able to do that in college or in high school, whatever it is, like I still have my making of Star Wars book by J.W. Rinsler, which, you know, you can get anywhere for $30 now, but I remember spending $60 on Amazon as a freshman in college to buy it, and it was just like, okay, like I won't eat for 2 weeks, like here we go. Like it's fine. So things like that I think still mean so much to me, you know, looking back at everything.
That's great. Yeah, it is. I think there's two types of collecting. There's the collecting for of true sort of monetary value and rarity and that sort of thing, and then there's the things that you have that are worth more to you than they'll be to anybody else, and things like that book. And you know, I find now with you know, an 8-year-old son who is really starting to, I'd love to say he's a collector. He's not. He just likes getting stuff. But you know, to be able to see his response and give him, you know, I have the handful of loose figures from, you know, the 70s and 80s that, you know, he'll play with, but those mean more to me. I couldn't sell them for lunch money, but they mean more to me because there's that connection, and there's something about Star Wars that does that. And I imagine that it's that Star Wars sentimentality that has led you into the direction you've gone with Talking Bay 94. And so tell me about some of your favorite experiences and some of your favorite conversations. I know it's always dangerous if anybody asks me of your 81 episodes, who's your favorite? I'm not going to answer it. But what are some of your more memorable experiences, or maybe some oh wow moments that you recall?
Yeah, there are a few that stick out to me, especially when I'm able to interact with someone in person. I think that always adds a secondary element to it, where I'm able to have that shared connection with them face to face. And the first time that really ever happened was with Timothy Zahn at San Diego Comic-Con, which was huge for me. Like as a kid growing up, like reading his books, and then he never came to Dallas for my entire life. He came to Dallas once when I was in college, and so I never was able to meet him. I had my whole stack of books, and then I worked with Del Rey to get an interview with him at the Del Rey booth at San Diego Comic-Con, like behind the curtains. And that was we were probably 6 months into the podcast at that point, so it still felt so new and so crazy that this was happening. And then all of a sudden I was like, it was just me and Timothy Zahn and Mrs. Zahn and my producer, talking for an hour. And I was able to like really interact with someone that meant so much to me growing up in such kind of a human way. And that still is one of my favorite episodes. There's one that really sticks out to me that I always recommend to people, especially if they don't like Star Wars, with Greg Proops, who's a comedian. He was on Whose Line Is It Anyway? But he was also one of the pod race announcers. And so I saw he was coming to Dallas to a comedy house, to do a set. And I just reached out to him blindly. I was like, hey, like if you wanted to talk about Star Wars, like I can do that with you. Yeah. And he was like, sure, like no one ever asked me to do that. That's fine. And so we went to the show and it was great. And then he came out after the show and he was like, hey, Brandon. And he was like, come on back. And we went to the green room and it was me and him and my producer and then the comedians that had opened for him. And they were all just we were sitting around in a semicircle and he was just kind of chain smoking and then did like a comedy set for like the five of us, about his experience on Phantom Menace. And it was incredible. Like it's all just so much fun to like think about and just a really good time.
Oh, that's great. So do you find that you get nervous before these conversations because you grew up with Star Wars, or has it become kind of like almost a job, and maybe because of your Fangoria experience or your other experience, how do you approach each interview? And I'll admit there's ones that I'm often not. You just never know where the interview is going to go, right? Especially when you're talking, when I think about some of the more well-known people that I've spoken to, you just hope that you're able to pull something from them, and sometimes those turn into just the most amazing experiences. How about yourself? What goes into those kind of conversations?
Yeah, I was lucky where one of my first jobs was doing the marketing for Texas A&M University. And just like with Star Wars, I grew up loving A&M athletics and loving A&M football and basketball. And so then when I was in the position to then be interfacing with these people that I grew up with, right? Because a lot of my work was sideline, whether it was emceeing or like helping with different like activations or when famous person would show up. We were told to it was explained to us as a duck in water, right? Like at the surface, it seems very calm. And on the bottom, that's where the feet are like really going for it and keeping the ship steady. And that's kind of how I've always approached it, which is let me treat this person not as someone that maybe I grew up watching the documentary and they were featured in it, or like I read their insider interview or their making of book, but let me really just kind of be a person with them. And that's really kind of helped me. Of course, I always get nervous, especially when it's someone like, I think Dennis Muren was the most nervous I've ever been, or Phil Tippett. And then Dennis Muren, I was not expecting a video with Dennis Muren, and all of a sudden his like face pops up on the screen, and I was like, oh, okay, like this is me a fun 30 minutes. That's fine. So it just depends. But I think I've gotten to a point now where I'm able to channel that fandom and that energy and that love that I have, but then turn it into something productive and something that's not as fanboy. And I think they end up appreciating it a lot. So
I 100%. And as I've listened to your show many times, and it definitely comes through that way. And I think that's important. I think that's also something that I'm sure the guests, and I know from experience, they kind of appreciate that you're not. Your show is never remember that time when you did that thing. It's very it's interesting that way. But so you're a Star Wars fan. Let's talk about how you feel about some of the content, and I'm not going to ask you to.
No, I'm ready. No, please, I'm ready.
Name one thing you like about. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. But so, what's exciting you in the Star Wars universe now? Because you are, as you said, you interview for video games and writers and movies and film. But what do you like? What's the content that you get the most excited about, and what's some stuff you're enjoying now?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone says Mandalorian now, but I think Mandalorian is such a great blend of what everyone loves about Star Wars by mixing new and old together. And I'm hoping with season 2, it's even more. I think the first season was so great, but it was also so nostalgia focused with the original trilogy. And I would love to kind of see that carry through. And I think with Filoni, I think it's going to be super easy to do that. Maybe not with the sequel trilogy interfacing with it as much, but I think with the animated shows even more. Because that's, I think, the moments that stand out to me are like when you see all the Mandalorians and you see all these, aspects of it kind of coming into play. So that is really exciting to me. And then I think we are really in this kind of renaissance of more and more content being geared towards me, which are these behind the scenes and the documentaries and the ways that I think what stands out to me is how they treated the 40th anniversary of Empire with the official channels. And I was very grateful that they did it that way. And we're able to kind of go back and talk to all these people, but still have it be new and exciting. And then even something like the Mandalorian Gallery show was just such a great, I was just so excited every Friday to wake up and watch that, almost more so than the actual. So things like that I think are always exciting. And then I'm very excited now that we're past the sequel trilogy to hear these new stories. And I think, whether it's High Republic or things that aren't kind of within that episode 3 to episode 5 range, I think are so exciting for me to kind of finally dive back into.
Yeah, it's I think your points on the Mandalorian are really, really smart because it's this really kind of unique kind of pull into old stuff that there's enough Easter eggs so that people who grow up with it are excited and are like, ooh, I remember that, but it doesn't necessarily hit you over the head with it, and I think that's interesting too. As we move into sort of new Star Wars areas, a question I've asked people in the past, and I think it's even more relevant as we move forward. As we get away from the Skywalkers, which I believe, if we're heading in that direction, where would you what makes something a Star Wars film to you, or a Star Wars story? What's that one element that needs to be there?
That's a great question. I don't know if Star Wars is one element. I think what makes Star Wars so special is that it's kind of a combination of all these different things that we innately know and love, right? And I think it goes all the way back to the Joseph Campbell stuff, where it's these stories that have been told and told and told and told. And so when you see it in this new setting, it already feels familiar to you, even though it's these crazy aliens and robots and ships flying around. And I think Star Wars is really important to not only have that Campbell aspect in the back of the mind, but I think Mandalorian Gallery said it really well, where they're not trying to get inspired by the sequel trilogy or the prequel trilogy or the original trilogy. They're trying to be inspired by the things that inspired George Lucas, right? Mm-hmm. So the samurai films, the serials, all those things. And I think that more than anything is needed in a Star Wars for it to feel, kind of like part of this universe. But I will say, for instance, I don't know if you read Chaos Rising, the new Thrawn book, but that is so alien to what we're used to in terms of again, the Skywalker saga or whatever it is, because it's kind of removed from everything. There's a couple little connections, of course, to the actual storyline that we're used to, but how that's set up and where that's going, I think is so interesting and so fresh that it makes it almost feel like it's almost more Star Wars than something else. So yeah,
and it's interesting because back in the old days in the 90s when there was the EU books, I think one of the challenges for the EU books, and I love always getting this kind of perspective, because the some of the EU books fell into sort of pure science fiction, and that I couldn't get into because it's funny, it's the old people I've known for years oh, you like Star Wars, my son loves Star Trek, and I'm like, right, that's awesome. It's not that I dislike Star Trek, it's very different, but you're right, there's sort of that. It's the bigger stories, the more sort of the type of storytelling that that goes way back further than science fiction. It goes back to sort of the base elements of storytelling, the samurai and whatnot. And I feel really good about the Star Wars saga being in the hands of Dave Filoni, because I think he gets it and he understands that sort of mindset. I've said it before, and you were talking about the gallery show, and I loved watching the gallery show as well. And I always felt like Filoni was kind of the nerd at the table, right? He was, you're there with Taika Waititi, and you're there with Jon Favreau and and Bryce Dallas Howard, and he's like talking about the well, actually, that was that lightsaber size was a little bit, he's like he's the actually guy, but it's so great, and it's what's making these stories work so well,
right?
So what do you want to see in Mandalorian season 2? What are you looking forward to?
Man, I think there's a lot of, obviously there are rumors and the leaks and all those things. And so there's part of my mind that is kind of anticipating a certain type of story. But I think where Mandalorian was so successful was like, we did not know about Baby Yoda, right? So that was just so surprising and so exciting. I think there was some rumors about, like, there was kind of a lone wolf and cub kind of aspect to it, but we had no really idea what was going to happen. And I'm hoping, and what I'm excited for are those surprises, right? And I think every week tuning in, and I would always wake up at like 5 a.m. to watch it before work, so it wouldn't get spoiled for me on Star Wars Twitter. But I think that excitement and that, like, never knowing what really is going to happen in the next week, because they kept their cards pretty close to the chest throughout the season. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I'm excited for, are not the things that maybe that we know, which I will be very excited if some of those things come to fruition. Yeah. But I am more excited for these kind of surprises or things that I can't believe Filoni pulled out, or or whatever it is. And I think that's going to go a really long way to making the season feel like its own thing.
Yeah, yes, 100%. And I think, one of the other comments I saw, I think on Twitter somewhere, was that, has Dave Filoni ever created a show that was what the title was, right? I mean, right, Rebels was a Jedi story. Right. Mandalorian, we all thought was going to be this sort of dusty streets, old cowboy kind of thing. And it's a father-son story. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. It's really, it's pretty wild. How do you feel about the way the saga ended? Did it end in a way that you were satisfied with, or do you think we need 10, 11, 12? Do you think, because it's fair to say it's been a mixed bag. It's been polarizing, sure. Yeah. But how do you feel as you grew up with the prequels, you watched the original trilogy, the story has quote unquote ended. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think with Rise of Skywalker, it's really interesting to me, because if you laid it all out and you said, here was what happened in Rise of Skywalker, I'd be like, sure, that's fine, that's great, sounds good. I think my problems with Rise of Skywalker more come with pacing and with some of the small decisions that were made that make me feel a little bit like we were saying. I think with Star Wars, it's important for me to feel like all the trilogies and all the different aspects are kind of together and feel cohesive. And I think this felt a lot of original trilogy and not so much prequel trilogy, which kind of, I think in the end, didn't make it feel like a full conclusion to a Skywalker saga for me. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I'm really in a place where this podcast has been so helpful for me, and I've told this story where if I have a problem with Star Wars, whether it is a thing in Rise of Skywalker or in a book or whatever it is, and then I get to talk to the person that made that decision, it helps me contextualize, because it's easy for someone to look at Rise of Skywalker and be like, oh, they just ignored this, or they just don't even care, or they're doing whatever. Right. And you really get to a point where you're talking to these creatives, you talk to these people that it's their job and they care about Star Wars and they love Star Wars and they grew up with Star Wars like we did. But then they're making actual decisions based on their love of Star Wars. Right. And I think that goes a long way for me to talk to those people. A great example is we're talking about how much I love the documentaries and how much I love behind the scenes. When I don't know if you remember, they surprise dropped Rise of Skywalker on iTunes. They're like, hey, FYI, if you pre-ordered it already, it's just free. You can just get it right now at like 3 weeks early or whatever. Yep. And for me, I was like, that's great. Like, I have it pre-ordered from Target or whatever but I need to be able to watch the documentary right now. This is a problem. Yep. And so then I ordered it on Amazon again, literally just to watch the documentary. And the documentary was great and really helped me with a few things. But then there was a part in the documentary, and I've been very public about this, where there was all about the sand snake. And it was like, here's what we did. And we made this incredible puppet, and we had 12 people working it. And it was a great way for everyone to like work on it by feeling like it was all connected and all in the same room. And then there's a throwaway line and they say, and then of course we just kind of computer generated and CG'd over it, and that's what you see in the final shot. You don't see the puppet, you see the CG. And I was just like, why did we do this? Like, what's the point? And so I was like kind of salty about it. And then I interviewed the guy that like was in charge of visual effects for Rise of Skywalker, who like made the decision to like CG over it. And by him walking me through his thought process and like what the team decided and like why they did it a certain way, I was like, oh, okay. Like it wasn't just to like mess with me and my love of like Jabba the Hutt, right? It was like a real decision that they had to make. And so things like that, I'm in a very obviously blessed position to be able to like talk to those kind of people. And now when I watch something Star Wars, I think the first time I watch it is as a fan, and then the repeat viewings are more like, oh, like I know the 3 people that designed this, or I've talked to this guy who like did this part of it, you know. And so I think with the show, it's been really interesting, and like being an A&M athletics marketer, like separating yourself as a fan and being more on the professional side of things, I think is such an interesting way to view things. That makes it a little almost more enjoyable for me, but I think that is some people might not agree with that.
Well, I think you bring up a good point, and I think maybe that's why, you know, I admit I get a little bit salty as well, and sometimes a little too much in the social media range and the realm, and I think it's because people don't understand those steps in the process, right? And not because they can't, it's just because they don't have exposure to it. And to your point, nobody's deliberately making a bad decision on a film, right? Nobody's doing something to say, how many fans can we piss off with this? What they're trying to do is they're making the best possible decision. And it's also very eye-opening once you understand what went into those processes, or even just, you know, just certain decisions of a writer or something like that to go that one way or another. It's always very interesting. And to your point, there are issues with Rise of Skywalker, but they came from a place we all assume of this is what we really firmly believe is what's best for the story.
Yeah, and I mean, Rise of Skywalker is probably my least favorite Star Wars movie, but I still watch it like once every 2 or 3 weeks. So it's like, what does that really mean? I like to think that like every piece of Star Wars media, all Star Wars is good Star Wars, right? No matter what it is, whether it's a holiday special, let's say you get a Boba Fett cartoon, you know, whether it's Rise of Skywalker, you can get some incredible set pieces and incredible acting, and you get Palpatine back. I think every single thing that Star Wars has put out, you can find something that's good, and I think that's what Star Wars ends up being, right? It's finding the good in things. And so if you can't do that with the actual, you know, things, I think it's important to be able to balance like obvious, important, constructive criticism about how something is being handled, but then being able to find some joy in the thing that you say that you like. So,
that's 100% it. And I think, do you get frustrated in social media, or do you ignore it? Do you engage?
I just try to ignore it. I try not to let it bog me down, because again, like what we're saying, I think my relationship with Star Wars is my relationship with Star Wars, and so I can't define that for anyone else. And you know, obviously, like when people have very serious complaints, especially about storytelling, it's tough for me to be like, well, like that's wrong, you know. So like, I think everyone's able to come to Star Wars from where they are, and I think that's what's important to realize. Both the positive and the negative. Someone can love Rise of Skywalker and be posting every day about their favorite scene in Rise of Skywalker, but someone also can be like, hey, I hated this part of Last Jedi, whatever it is. Yep. And I think all of that together is what makes Star Wars fandom good and bad, but I think you can't, it's never been the case where everyone's been like, this is great, everything about this is great. So
right. Well, and I love the conversations that are going on now about when people look back at the prequels, right? Because I'm the first to admit the prequels, I was at the New York City premiere of Phantom Menace and walked out of the theater near, you know, with Liam Neeson and Natalie Portman. Not with them, I wasn't with them, but you know, I was, and I still didn't love the movie. Now, 20 plus years later, I really like it, and I like what it's done for the story. Without Phantom Menace, without Attack of the Clones, without Revenge of the Sith, you don't get Clone Wars. You don't get great characters,
right?
And it was it was doing something. And the way people will look at movies that are as divisive as The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, in 10 years, in 5 years, in 20 years is going to be very, very interesting.
Yes, it's gonna be very different too. I think anyone that's 10 years old right now and not on Twitter will have no idea. They'll be like, I liked that movie when I was 10, and it's like cool. So 100%. I like it now. So
yeah. And what stories are going to come after it that are going to make those stories more whole, right? I mean,
that's a great point.
Yeah, Qui-Gon Jinn had 60 minutes of screen time or whatever it is, but he's an important part of the lore. So to get him for any time is great. So yeah, I think it's I'm excited to see what the future holds for these stories, which is interesting. Do you think do you think we're done with Skywalkers, or do you think we'll see them again?
I think we're definitely going to get Rey and Poe and Finn stories. Whether it's through a movie or through a TV show or through animated, through whatever it is, I think is up to be seen. I think they wait a few years. I do think now, though, like the Skywalker saga is technically over, right? There are no more Skywalkers. But I think there's so much that hasn't been mined yet from especially the prequel trilogy, and you're seeing that more and more. Yep. I think that's where they're going to really find a lot of like fertile ground to kind of reap some great stories from. And that's some of the things I've been really enjoying were like Master and Apprentice and Queen's Peril and Queen's Shadow, things that like flesh out the prequels very directly.
Yeah.
There's still huge opportunities there. I'm one of the things that I would like. We don't know anything about Shmi Skywalker. Like the Skywalker saga is over, but we don't know how the Skywalker saga began, right? So it's like there's opportunities to like really still within the boundaries that we've set for what a Skywalker saga is, like be able to flesh out a story. So I'm fine with whatever they do.
That's the right approach. I love that. That's I'm not way too. Give me anything. You're going to give me something, I'll take it. I'm not going to complain. So that's great. So I'm at this point in the show where we did the 10 question thing. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but it's 10 questions. There's no wrong answers. I'll judge you permanently.
Sure.
But otherwise, it's fine.
Right.
But short answers, long answers, however you want to go with it. But let's jump right in. So,
I'm ready.
What is your favorite Star Wars movie, TV show, or book?
That's tough. I mean, I always say, my favorite Star Wars movie is the original Star Wars,
right?
And I think that without it, you wouldn't have everything else. So, like, I always have to say, like, my favorite Star Wars movie is Star Wars: A New Hope. And then when you go to TV shows, I think Clone Wars sticks out to me as just being this full arc, and I love that it was finished, and I love that you see not only the graphics improve, but you see the storytelling like really get its footing, and really like Filoni coming into his own, especially like leaving kind of the nest of George Lucas, right, and having to do this on his own. So I think Clone Wars in terms of TV show, and then book, like we were talking, the Thrawn trilogy was always so important to me, and I think Zahn's importance within Star Wars expanding universe, but now within the canon, I think cannot go unsaid. So I don't know if I was supposed to say one of each, but that is my answer, and I am sticking to it.
That is fine. Yeah, some people give all three, some people don't. That's great. I think you brought up a good point, and this is, I feel like I say this every time I do the 10 questions. There's always at least one answer that makes me think about things differently. The thing that's interesting about Filoni finishing the Clone Wars in the Disney era is pretty wild. I never thought of it before. I always thought of it, well, it's a story he always had in mind. Well, that's true. Right. But when he was doing the first, 5 seasons or 6, it was under the watchful eye of George Lucas, whether it was directly or indirectly. Sure. And now, when he finally got to close out the story, whether it was what he had in mind years ago or not, he did it on his own, and that says a lot. And it was exciting too to see Mandalorian episode 1 win an Emmy. That was his episode.
Oh yeah,
so, very exciting stuff. All right, so I have to ask the follow-up question, which is, what is your least favorite Star Wars movie, TV show, or book?
Cool. Okay, cool. We talked about Rise of Skywalker, and I think that I've established that it might be my least favorite, but I still enjoy it as a thing, but I understand where everything is coming from. So I'll say Rise of Skywalker, just to say Rise of Skywalker is my least favorite movie. In terms of TV show, something that still has not hit for me as hard as the other shows, and there's only 4 or 5 shows to choose from, but Resistance really never really hit as hard as the other ones did for me, and I think that is more of where my expectations were for the show, and not necessarily the quality of it. And I think my revisiting of it, especially now that it's on, I was watching it when it was coming out on my YouTube TV as DVR'd thing, so I'd have to like forward through all the kids commercials and all that stuff. And I think that affected like how I was watching and like my mindset. And I think if I did a rewatch, which I probably will be doing because we're finishing Rebels right now, if I did a rewatch of Resistance, it would escalate itself for me. And then with books, again, growing up when the expanded universe was like in its full like force, right. I think it's pretty easy to be like, oh, those were the weakest Star Wars books,
right?
And like things like I think New Rebellion sticks out to me, or like Courtship of Princess Leia stick out to me. Of just like I was like, we didn't need that. Like, why did you do that? Like, I don't care. And so yeah, I think, but again, all Star Wars is good Star Wars, and those things stick out to me. Whether it's Courtship of Princess Leia having a Drew Struzan cover, like that's incredible. Like cool. Like he's only done 15 Star Wars things. Like let's think about that. So so things like that stick out to me in terms of least favorite, but hopefully that is not as controversial as it could be. So
well, it's always hard, and I find too, even like for me, it's hard to say, although it's true that Resistance is my least favorite TV show, because Christopher Sean was such a wonderful guest. But listening to his story of that, and this kind of goes to what you were saying before, and understanding how he approached it, again, I don't love the style of the show, and I don't feel like it was as deep a Star Wars story as the others, but I understand it now a lot more, and so again, it's my least favorite, but simply because if I grab the remote and there's 4 choices, that's least likely to be selected. So yeah, but yeah, it is funny when you do get to know some of the people behind the scenes. It definitely impacts questions like that one. It's hard to, and see, it's really funny when I ask that question of like Star Wars authors, and I feel like, all right, go ahead and ruin your career right here on my show.
Right. Yeah, no, we can't say that.
So would you consider yourself an Imperial or a Rebel?
See, that's tough. I think, and again, that's where the Rose story in Last Jedi really worked for me, and I know it didn't work for some people, but Rose in Last Jedi, in my opinion, and I think that was Rian Johnson's intention, was what I would be in Star Wars, right? Like, I wouldn't be the fighter pilot or the Jedi or whatever. I would be in the rebellion, messing around, like scrubbing floors, just hanging out, like excited to see a dude, running a rebellion podcast, being like, today I'm with Poe Dameron, like this is great. Like, you know what I mean? So I think I would be rebellion. I would not be like the top brass or whatever. I would just be like either running their propaganda, right? Or like scrubbing floors. So yeah, I'd have to go rebellion.
You'd be running the rebellion Twitter handle and just
right, exactly. It's like Princess Leia said this. So yeah,
that's great. That's funny. Yeah, it's funny. James Bainey from the Resistance broadcast was on, and when I asked him that question, he said anybody who picks one side completely is not telling the truth unless they're already, doing something. It's kind of true. I mean, and that's why we love the movies, because you can identify with the rebels and hate the Empire, but know that if it was a real world situation, it'd be a very different thing. So
yeah.
So what is your favorite Star Wars sound effect?
That's tough too. That's tough, if only because like I love like Ben Burt. Like I have a list of people that I want to come on the show. And, like Ben Burt is like has been the top of the list forever. And what Ben Burt did with Star Wars, not only that, but like how he collected like this library of sound that we still like associate with an entire universe is incredible to me. So anything Ben Burt did sticks out, and I think I can, with the original trilogy, it's R2D2 with what he did, because that's all him doing baby talk in a microphone. That's incredible. And then with the prequel trilogy, it's been said a lot, but I love the seismic charge in Attack of the Clones. I think it's so cool. But again, both of those, Ben Burt like just freaking out. And there's an incredible book, The Sounds of Star Wars, that he wrote, and you can plug in your headphones and listen to like the highest quality isolated sound effects you can possibly hear, and it just elevates Star Wars to a whole new level. So
it's amazing. I hate to tell you this, my very first interview was Ben Burt.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So I was it's a very long story, but the short version of the story is he directed a film called Special Effects, which was an IMAX film, and it premiered in New Jersey. And it was actually the first story I ever wrote for Star Wars Galaxy magazine. It sort of got me in. But meeting him was wild because, similar to what you were saying, I was nervous as hell. Of course, first of all, it was my first thing to do.
Yeah.
Second of all, it's Ben Bert.
Right.
But he was just one of these guys that I almost felt like he was almost as amazed as I was to be talking about the stuff he did. Like he was just happy. Oh, you care about this? Let's talk about it. So he was just a great guy. So he's great. And
no, he's great. I used to crank call him because you could find the Skywalker Sound phone number relatively easily as a 10-year-old. And so I would be like, they're like Skywalker Sound. I'd be like, can I talk to Ben Bert? I'd be like, hello. He'd be like, hello. And I'd be like, okay, goodbye. And I send him a couple of I have a couple of things that he like wrote back and signed and stuff. And then I was able to meet him 2 years ago. Last year, I flew to LA and he was there. But yes, one day I will do a one-on-one interview with Ben Bert, and that'll be the time that I fanboy a little bit, not too much, but just a little bit. It'll just be a little bit.
I can't wait to hear it. That'll be great. Who's your favorite droid, R2-3PO or BB-8?
I mean, like with my favorite sound, I think R2-D2 is just like he's the connective tissue to the entire Star Wars, right? If you see R2-D2, you know it's Star Wars. And not only is it the sounds and how it's built, and it's Kenny Baker inside, but it's also remote control, and it's like all these different aspects of what makes a behind the scenes of a Star Wars movie or TV show great. But then it's also like it's George Lucas's favorite character, right? It's the person that is the viewpoint of every single thing that's happening in a Star Wars movie. So I think whenever he is on screen and is able to like be there, I always think of him as the George Lucas substitute, kind of like filming everything so I will say R2-D2. Long story, long R2-D2.
No, that's fine. I think that's probably my biggest disappointment with the sequels in general, with the lack of R2. But I get it, and
I understand. And I think he's used in very specific ways. I think Last Jedi is fine. Like that in itself makes up for everything, right? With how he's used in that. But yeah, I would love to have seen like R2 like fly in and like save the day somewhere, So,
but. Yeah. All right. So, what spaceship or vehicle from the Star Wars universe would you most like to own?
That is a good question. I think it's easy to say. It's very easy to say Millennium Falcon, right? So that's the best. Millennium Falcon. Like I was able to go to Galaxy's Edge and like you go into the Millennium Falcon like you're like this is crazy, right? I think if it was Millennium Falcon, I would say Lando's Millennium Falcon, right? I think I love Lando. We haven't talked about that as much, but I love Lando. And I think Lando's Millennium Falcon, I have a Lego of it in my other room. But then to vary it up, though, if there was one that I'd most like to own, I would say the Outrider from Shadows of the Empire. I would say that. I'd say like, why not? Like, why not be a little different? Why not be a little Dash Rendar? So that's what I would go with.
You and Steele Saunders have now said out.
Oh, there we go. There you go. I'll tell Steele that we are Outrider brothers. That's great.
Yeah, I've become a big fan of the Ghost as well.
Oh, that's great too.
But Outrider's a great call.
No, Ghost is great, and I've been looking because me and my fiance have been watching Rebels, which has been really nice because she's a Star Wars fan, but she's not like as obviously into the minutiae as I am. And so when I was watching Clone Wars and the new season, she really gravitated towards Ahsoka. And I was like, that's great. I was like, okay, like now let's watch Rebels and like see how her story continues. So we've been watching Rebels together and she's been really enjoying it. And so I was like, okay, like could I find the Ghost Lego that they made, like 5 years ago? And you cannot. Like that is a very expensive Lego. Yeah. So we'll see, but I bought the Razor Crest Lego, so I'll be building that this weekend.
Yeah,
so
but that's literally sitting right behind me, just waiting.
I'm excited. I'm pumped. I'm gonna rewatch the show and try to enjoy the build. But I'm excited to put that together.
That's gonna be a big one. I just finished the Poe Dameron X-wing and
oh nice.
But so my tip for as a Ghost fan, I ended up. A friend of mine on Twitter had found that the X-Wing miniatures were all like 50% off at Barnes & Noble, and I came across a Ghost, and I was like, let me PayPal you or let me Venmo you. Pick that up. Because that it's sitting up there. It's so detailed, and I just love the colors, and it's got that sort of ugly 70s, 80s coloring.
It's weird, right? It's like a weird shape too. Like it's like it's so Star Wars, right? Where like that could have been designed in the 70s. Yeah. Speaking of X-Wing, though, like to change that, I did because I love those are incredible models. Like those are so nice.
Yeah.
And when they were announced, I was like, this is great. Like, I can get into this from the ground up. Like, that's great. And then, like, I bought the starter pack. I bought a few of the expansions. I was like, I'll teach myself. And I was like, teaching my family how to play with me so I could practice. And then a local comic book shop was like, we're doing an X-Wing tournament. Like, you can come. And I was like, okay, I'm ready. I played 3 games before I got kicked out, and I was just the worst. I was so bad. And my dad came. He's like, oh, my son is like playing. Like, I was like probably like 25, and he's like, my son is playing. Like, I'm gonna come support him. And I was just like getting like my butt kicked by like a 12-year-old.
It's funny. I've never played the game, but I love the miniatures.
They're great. No, they're incredible.
So great. Yeah, I like you, and that's my biggest fear about Star Wars Squadrons coming out in a couple weeks.
Oh my God.
I'm going to be awful at it because I the online version anyway. At least I'm sure I'll make it through the campaign, but I just I tend to want to be great at the games. I never am. My son,
I know.
Who's 8, kills me in Battlefront 2. We played the other day and we did the split screen, and he's I think at one point he said to me, Dad, are you even trying?
I think I got halfway through the Battlefront 2 campaign, and I was like, I'll just watch this on, I think it was Star Wars Explained. I was like, I'll just watch him play it. Like, it's fine. Like, it'll be whatever. And that's what I'll probably do with Squadrons, because there's no way that I'll be good at that.
It's I love it though. It's all great stuff. What's your favorite, Porg, Ewok, or Jar Jar Binks?
I think between Ewok and Jar Jar is like trying to be like, who is your favorite? Like, both of those stick out to me as just like the 2 things that not only have been weirdly, not politicized, the wrong word, but like antagonized throughout the Star Wars thing. But both of them are just like, that's Star Wars. Like, if you don't like them, like, oh, that's Star Wars. So Jar Jar, to me, I think as a child of the prequels, like we've been talking about, is the person I would pick. Not only because of Ahmed Best and because of the character and because of the love that I had for him as a 7-year-old, but also because of what it did for special effects. And like, that is the first CG only main character besides like Casper and Dobby, right? That like was a real thing right there. And so I think what Ahmed Best did, but not only that, but what Rob Coleman did and John Knoll and all those guys, it's hard to like be like, oh, like, but I didn't like his accent. I didn't like how he talked. Like, I think being able to like separate all of that and just contextualize it within a special effects environment, you would have to say Jar Jar. But then I love not only Ahmed Best's performance, but like, that's a very Star Wars thing. It was like, let me take C-3PO and make him even more bumbling, and here's Jar Jar. So enjoy.
No, and you made a great point, and I try to make it when I can. It is without Jar Jar, you don't get half the you don't get Avengers, you don't get any of those things, because he was the first full-time character on screen that was that, and Ahmed Best, without his characterization, you don't get him. So
Incredible.
All right, so if you could be any character in Star Wars, who would you be and why?
Man, that's tough. Only because all Star Wars characters end up kind of sad. So I'm trying to think of who does not end up the most sad. I think I think growing up, I never really contextualized, because I was like, oh, I love Han Solo. But I think underlying that was like, I loved Lando. And I think it was not only seeing someone that like kind of looked like me and like was different and was kind of removed from everything, and Billy Dee Williams' performance, but like I would have to say Lando, even like when you see him not only in Solo with Donald Glover, but then how his arc restarts in Rise of Skywalker. I think his story and what he's done and like what we don't know, I think is the most exciting. So I'll have to say Lando.
And you are right. He's the only one of him and Wedge are the only ones that made it out alive. So.
Right. So it's either that or Wedge. Yeah. Dennis Lawson shaking someone's hand at the end. It's great. So,
yeah. Oh, that's a great pick. All right. What's your favorite trilogy? The originals, the prequels, or the sequels?
That's tough. I will always say original trilogy, if only because like that's the ones that I've actually not the ones I watched the most even, but the ones that mean the most to me and the ones that I've like revisited in terms of not only like behind the scenes content, but also just like how they've impacted how movies have gone. But really right up behind that is the prequel trilogy, because again, like we're talking about prequel trilogy and how they were received, but again, like you're saying, we don't have any of the MCU without the prequel trilogy. We don't have any movies right now without the prequel trilogy and what they did for computer-generated effects with how they were shot, with how they were shown in movie theaters. All those things kind of combined into like George Lucas being 10 years ahead and people just like not keeping up. But then when you're 7 years old and you're watching them, and then you're watching them as a 17-year-old and as a 27-year-old, you're like, okay, like I understand where this is all going. So original trilogy, but then right behind prequel trilogy.
Yeah, it's a fair.
Yeah, I'm hedging my bet. Yeah.
There you go. That's fine. So the last question is, what is your favorite Star Wars quote?
That's good. That's fine. I can figure that out. Yeah, because I don't have any tattoos right now.
Okay.
And I shouldn't say this because then people are going to take my tattoos ideas. But I'm going to say them.
Well, in case you never get it, like if.
Well, so here's the thing, which is I've told people, I was like, okay, I only have a few tattoos in mind, but they have to be because I've done something, right? So I want a Lord of the Rings tattoo. But I have to have gone to New Zealand, right? I have to have gone to all the places. I was like, okay, if I do that, then I can do that. And like with Star Wars tattoos, it's like, okay, if I go to Lucasfilm or Skywalker Ranch, I can get a Star Wars tattoo. Like that will be like, I've been invited and that will be my like commemoration of it. So I really want the targeting computer from A New Hope, because I think that's very nice and stylized and simple. But then I really like Stay on Target. I think as like and if you did that in Arabesh and kind of combine that, I think as a whole would be like kind of how I've used Star Wars, not only my professional career, but like my personal, but just like keeping myself focused and like keeping myself kind of on track and using people that I've either talked to or just kind of read about as inspiration for like how to be creative while still being professional. So Stay on Target, I think, is my my quote of choice.
That is a great quote. I love that. That's and the reason for it is great as well. So, well, Brandon, thank you so much. This has been so much fun. I really appreciate you spending some time with me and telling me some of your stories. And I hope to have you again on the show. Tell people where they can find you and where they can find Talking Bay 94 and anything else that you're involved in.
Talking Bay 94. Every Wednesday is a new episode with someone that was in Star Wars or worked on Star Wars. You can find me on Twitter at TalkingBay94, on iTunes, TalkingBay94. I've made it pretty easy for people to find the show. But yeah, we have some great episodes coming up, and I'm really excited for people to dive in. So
excellent. Well, if you're not listening to Talking Bay 94, you should be. It's perfect. It comes out on Wednesdays. You can listen to Around the Galaxy on Tuesdays. Then on Wednesdays, you get your Talking Bay and
1-2 punch. There it is. Yeah.
So, but Brandon, thank you so much. This was a real blast, and I hope to talk to you again.
All right. Thanks, man.